Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with you all. My name is Constantine Karides. I'm a partner at the global law firm of Reed Smith. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this panel of esteemed individuals with incredibly successful track records in investing and managing businesses, and in investing in Greece and managing businesses outside of Greece. So without further ado, I'd like to just allow each of them to make a short introductory remark about their history in Greece or investing, and then we'll get into some specific questions, but I think it's appropriate to allow the panelists to introduce themselves. John, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'm John Calamos, and I've been coming to Greece for a number of years, and we've been looking at investment here to look for opportunities here, and so we have some perspective on that, and we're a bit more positive this year than we've been in past years, so we feel that some things are progressing in that sense. Of course, with Brexit, it's changed a lot of that as well.
Hi, Dean Dakolias from Fortress Investment Group. We've made some investments already in Greece. I think our first investment here probably 3 years ago in the consolidation of the passenger ferry business, but have been very cautious in terms of how we've invested in Greece to date. Beginning to look at more opportunity, particularly in the hospitality side. So I agree with John that the environment seems to be improving, although the results of Thursday probably put a wrench in things for some time.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is John Koudounis. I'm currently the new CEO of Calamos Investments. Recently came from Zuho Securities, where I was the president and CEO there. And I have been coming with John and Dean for the last several years, and we're always looking at opportunities. We've recently taken a bigger dive and a closer look and started dipping our toe into some investments, particularly in the real estate space, and we are going to continue to look. I think there are opportunities, although they're very selective, and not this Brexit obviously is going to put a little bit of a blunder on it, but any investments that I think that any of us may do at any size is not going to be substantial enough unless there's other changes that we can talk about later on the panel.
Thank you. My name is Dean Metropoulos. I've been here before, and I've enjoyed this audience. We make investments as well around the world, and Greece is, for me, my favorite place to invest. We've continued to look at opportunities here. The Brexit is an issue for the time being, but we take a very long-term view of the opportunities we look at. So I don't see that affecting things long-term, particularly for Greece. Maybe Cyprus might have a little more impact, but nevertheless, it has not been as easy to find appropriately priced opportunities in Greece to reflect not only the economic issues, but also the risk of starting in Greece. So that continues to be a challenge for us, but at the same time, as we spoke last year, and one of the reasons I come to this conference is to continue to support progress in bureaucracy, the legal system, less government. If I can be helpful in any way in advocating those subjects for the Greek community and the Greek political environment, that's my purpose for being here. Not that I have the answers, but I see those as being important impediments to attracting long-term investments. So we'll talk about that further.
I'm Nikos Mouyiaris, CEO of Envato Products from New York. I'm not here to talk about, investments in Greece because I don't believe that right now is the right climate for investments to come to Greece. I wish it was. But I'm here to speak with all of us as to how, utilizing the resources that Greece has in human and other resources, we will be able, in years to come, to really turn this economy around and not depend on other people to really create jobs for us, but we can create jobs of our own with what God gave us in brain power, where we can really thrive with new technologies in agricultural goods and in tourism. I'm here to really discuss these things with you and with the overseas Greeks to really see how we can immediately be able to take advantage of these assets and create wealth, which will really start helping the Greek people and the Greek economy thrive.
Thank you so much. There's a couple things that came out of the initial introduction, I think, one of which we must delve into just a little bit more specifically, and then we can also address some of the entrepreneurship opportunities in Greece, as Nikos might guide us through that. But I think the first thing that's foremost on all of our minds as we sit here in Athens is, what does Brexit mean for the institutional investor or the international investor in Greece, both in the short term and the long term, and whether there are more opportunities or fewer opportunities that might come out of that, and what your own perspective might be on what the ultimate impact is in Greece as a member of the Eurozone. So why don't we start with Dean on this one?
Thanks.
There's two deans.
Which dean? Which dean?
I think your side of the business is impacted a
Perfect.
lot more by the Brexit.
No, look, I think the Brexit obviously did, as I said before, put a wrench into kind of how we think about investing as U.S.-based firms in Europe. And it will create opportunities. The volatility that already has been created, the banking system, the stocks and banks are down 20% from Thursday night through today. So there's going to be stress. There's going to be some trauma that results. But what makes it challenging for us is the uncertainty that comes with it. How do you think about Europe? How do you think about the model going forward? I think the results in Spain on Sunday in the election were positive relative to the negative of the vote on Thursday. But I still think it creates an environment of uncertainty. And that probably causes us to be more cautious about investing in places like Greece versus investing in the more traditional parts of Europe. So I think until you see some clarity on what the Brexit means, how the European Union is going to operate going forward, it becomes more challenging for us. And as Dean said before, that may be just a short-term issue, a short-term aberration, but it's going to take some time for, I think, the Europeans to figure out how their model with the UK or whatever's left of the UK, moves forward.
Does that mean that there is going to be more focus on specific sectors that have some attractive pricing built into that instability? Both John and John mentioned real estate is something they're looking at. Do you feel like that's still going to be an attractive sector or more attractive sector following Brexit? Has that informed your choice at all, John?
Yeah, I think we have to remember that Brexit was not an economic event; it was a political event. 2008 was an economic event, so it's different from that point of view. But it does create a lot of uncertainty because of this political event. But on the other hand, uncertainty provides opportunity, and maybe to your point, which sectors are going to be, best in this area. So it's something that we need to look very carefully. Obviously, the banks and financials are not the place to be with the lower interest rates in that area, but there are some good opportunities. I would think that real estate provides a good investment longer term. It's a bit of an inflation hedge if interest rates ever do come back. In that sense, but it's how it affects, it's going to be how it affects Europe as a whole, not necessarily just Greece.
John, do you have anything more to add to that?
Sure. I agree with John's assessment. It was clearly political, what happened with Brexit, yet the results are extremely economical. And I don't think it was sold to the people in the UK of what the real effects are. If you look at today alone, Barclays is down 23%, RBS is down 20%, Deutsche 9%, Credit Suisse 10%. All the banks are taking big hits. Combination of the top two are 30 to 40%, Deutsche and RBS respectively. Those are huge hits in just 2 days. Those are big things. Having said that, if you look at global markets, they're extremely resilient. They're resilient to bad news, and they're resilient to good news. But what they're not resilient to is uncertainty. And that's what we have now. Huge uncertainty, which is causing this chaos. So why? I think there's sectors that we could look at that are opportunistic, but I think what we need to remember is, how did we get to this place? And if you look at the correlation of the UK and Greece, because that's why we're here today, right, to see what we can do and try to help Greece, it's the austerity measures that it put on to Europe. And the problem with that is most of the austerity measures are put on to the public sector, to the private sector, and not the public sector. And as a result of that, we get things like Brexit. And for the first time since a year ago, we're starting to hear the word contagion. And that word became very popular when Greece was about to leave, or rumored to leave about a year ago. Then nobody heard about it till last Friday. And that's an issue, and that's going to continue to have uncertainty, and it's going to affect all of Europe and, unfortunately, Greece.
Thank you. Dean Metropoulos, you've been a star in identifying sectors to invest in from the private equity perspective, and in this stressed market here in Greece and with the pile-on of Brexit, is it something you'll look at more specifically here in Greece? Are there certain types of businesses or industries that are attractive to you?
Yes, I think there are some opportunities. I just met with a gentleman, in fact, that I think provides an opportunity to create a partnership with people on the ground that know the environment, know how to work with the labor force. But more importantly, the Brexit and some of the volatility that John and Dean talk about are less impactful on us. They're clearly impactful in how you finance these transactions, but we take a longer term, 3 to 5 year point of view that talks about what's the positioning of a company that we invest in. We buy companies. In my personal investments, I'm concerned obviously with volatility in the stock markets, the credit markets, et cetera. But on our business, we look at businesses that have fundamental capabilities to grow and expand and then make acquisitions around them. The environment isn't quite right yet. I think we speak about uncertainty in the Greek environment, and pricing is not reflecting that uncertainty yet. I think whether it's real estate, and we have looked at some things there, or some of these businesses, it is very difficult to still transact, and because good or bad, in Greece, for example, there will not be a lot of foreclosures on defaulting companies. So all these businesses that have not been paying their interest or their principal, no one is foreclosing on them. So if we see an environment like this, we look for an opportunity that is a foreclosure, one that has the size that makes it interesting for us, and a position that we feel we can grow. That has not quite been the case yet, and the thing that's why we look for local partners, and I think there's some great local partners, both financial investment firms, private equity firms, and individuals that help guide us through this process of dealing with a bureaucracy, dealing with an uncertain and unpredictable legal system, dealing with unions and so forth. So I think we look for those opportunities, and I think they'll be coming along over the coming year. So we continue to be positive and explore ideas here in Greece. But I continue, and I said this last year, the best thing we have is an entrepreneurial culture, a highly intelligent group of people, young people, and the thing that's a great opportunity, I'm taking too long, but I was at a conference last week, and we need to put together people like Eric Schmidt, who's the head of Google, was there, and they talk about an environment where young startups are really encouraged to put in, they attract capital from Apple and Google, but they cannot create a lot of bureaucracy around them where you stifle these wonderful young people who want to create these new startup ideas, particularly in the technology space. To me, that's the biggest dream for Greece, and the young, and by the way, real estate as well, but the young people have the intelligence, the education, and we have to find this ability to connect them with capital that wants to build around this sector. So that's our biggest asset.
Thank you, Dean. Nikos, this kind of segues neatly into your perspective, and that is, it seems like there's instability in the marketplace with additional layers added on, and there's a window here where maybe there won't be much investment activity, so that the type of entrepreneurial, organic Greek businessman needs to step up, I suppose. You have a lot of thoughts around that. Do you have any specific ones for dealing with this current climate and how one might go about it?
I agree with the fellow panelists about Brexit being a political statement, basically, and not an economic statement. I don't believe that this will affect Greece very much, maybe a little less, fewer tourists from Great Britain, but this we will overcome. I believe in with this Brexit and the rise of Trump in the United States and the rise of Golden Dawn here, et cetera, all these extreme parties and extreme actions by the people in different countries, we have to look at the cause of these things. And to me, the cause of these things, it is the chasm in income between the rich and the poor are getting poorer, and the middle class basically diminishing, and how to really help alleviate this inequality in income, and how we can, as Dean said, encourage young entrepreneurs and technologists to really start new businesses in everything that Greece has, whether it is in agricultural products, whether it is in technology or in tourism, et cetera, anything that God gave us here as natural resources and human resources. If we manage to really help the young entrepreneurs here in Greece to start a small business, it doesn't matter what business it is, but when they do that and find out that they can really create jobs for themselves and be able to make money and manage businesses and become leaders in their community, eventually we will get rid of this menace of depending on the state to give our young people jobs. And that's what really killed entrepreneurship in Greece. That's what killed every initiative that the Greeks have basically naturally. We are natural entrepreneurs and small business. And never forget that small business worldwide provides 75% of the employment. And that's what we could create here, create more wealth, and also teach our young people as to how to become entrepreneurs and leaders, because that's what we are lacking. We are lacking leadership, and that's what brought us into the state we are in. And we have to move forward, and as overseas Greeks, our duty it is to help in each and every way, whether it's giving advice, giving guidance, providing some money. That is our duty, I believe, that we have to help Greece and help Greece immediately. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, let's bring it down then to the level of Greek government and Greek regulatory opportunities or efforts to make it easier to do business in Greece. I think they touch on both entrepreneurialism and also the interest and willingness of a foreign investor and institutional investor to invest in Greece. What, in your views, can or should be getting done in Greece to stimulate those types of investments and also to assist the Greek entrepreneurial in being able to form a small business? John Koudounis, you want to take a first shot at this one?
Sure. We had a very interesting meeting with the mayor of Athens yesterday, so we'll take it down directly, not just to Greece, but Athens. And they're trying very hard to make changes, positive changes. What they're doing is they have a triangle in the middle of the city that they've outlined where they're trying to make it special purpose, where they're going to close traffic, where they're going to try to do business in a certain way. And I really appreciate his efforts, and I think they're doing everything they can. But what they need most and what they have to get in order for them to get success is they need the help of the federal government to give some kind of tax abatement. In these areas, not too far, a few blocks from here, we have 40% not occupied buildings that are just vacant, that no one's there. They're like war zones. I mean, it's terrible. There's really, there's some bad issues going here. We need the federal government to subside in some of these huge taxes that they're having. They have to have some kind of initiative where we can take this triangle and make it a tech corridor and have some tax abatements to move companies from other parts of the world that are willing to come here and invest, have ability to give them more tax abatement if they hire the kids out of the universities here in Athens and in the rest of Greece, where there's some of the brightest minds in the world that can't get jobs, they have to go somewhere else. And if you can do that, if you can start with one building, where a company, an anchor tenant, a Google, an Amazon, a Twitter, or something like that, would come in here and have some kind of advantage because the government is giving it to them, it goes from one building to the next, to the block, to the area, and it spreads like wildfire. And that really needs to happen. There has to be an incentive for money to come here in Greece, and if they can do just a little tweaking, you'd be surprised how quickly things can change.
Thank you. Dean Metropoulos, you were talking about the limitations on foreclosures and things of that nature that sometimes don't allow a company to go to the full cycle that reopens it for investment. Have you been looking at or considering bankruptcy law reform in Greece as a factor in your decision-making in approaching investment in Greece or otherwise?
The answer is no. I'm not a lawyer, and I deal with a lot of lawyers, and they stifle the entrepreneurial spirit, but you need them. So for me to get involved with the bankruptcy laws, try to influence and impact those is not it's not on my radar screen. I want to add to something that John Israel is a phenomenal model for these free zones, business-free zones, no bureaucracy, young technology, incubation processes that take place there. I'm telling you that the mayor yesterday was telling us that he's working very closely with Michael Bloomberg. He's a very receptive and intelligent man, and I know we all can reach out to Michael. I think I would send a small team from the government here. By the way, we were here with Bill Clinton about 5 years ago, meeting with Mr. Samaras, who was a wonderful gentleman, and he spoke of the same thing, and it just triggered to me that we ought to try to follow the Israeli model. They have incubations where there's no bureaucracy, there's no tax issues, because there's no revenue to tax. This taxes just stifle, bureaucracy just stifles. So I would, I wish the government, and even then, would send a small group. I know we can get that set up through the U.S., if not directly with Israel, to follow that model of free zones and technology incubation. It would be an eye-opener. It is the best. Europe is not that good at it, by the way. People do find Europe too bureaucratic. The universities are not responding to this wonderful new technology age of ours that's affecting medicine, it's affecting food, it's affecting industrial everything, home building. So this is a wonderful new age, and if we don't capture a moment to bring incubation here in Greece, and by the way, the capital is available. All these large companies love to invest in a small incubation period because they're reaching out to talent around the world. So if I could encourage anything, I'd put a small group together to go and follow this through in Israel and see how they make it execute so very effectively. So, okay.
Thank you. Dean Dakolias, do you have any thoughts about what would make it more attractive for you and your company to invest in Greece? Any suggestions or?
Well, for us to invest, the way it's structured, primarily on the real estate side, there are ways to invest through REITs in Greece that are actually relatively tax efficient. But on the broader side, I echo a lot of things people have said. But creating a tax-free zone or some area where you have tax incentives is a wonderful idea. But I think the system as a whole needs to be reformed. The pension system, the cost of hiring people in Greece is prohibitive in terms of labor. So the system needs to be reformed to encourage people to hire and not discourage them to hire. What's the greatest export of Greece in the last 5 years? People. Right? Three-quarters of all graduates have left, right? They've left to find jobs elsewhere in Europe, the U.S., Australia, wherever it is. If we're going to continue to export those people, it's hard to imagine a good future. So how do you create more opportunities for them? You lower the cost of hiring them. You give them incentives. You hopefully create some entrepreneurship programs. A lot of us are part of THI, which funds some entrepreneur programs in Greece as well. How do we encourage more people, more groups to do the same? A big part of that is creating an incentive structure, a tax structure here in Greece that allows for you to hire people out of college without a huge cost.
Thank you. Nikos, you have a view on that?
I agree with Dean and everybody else here. We have great opportunities in each and every area of economic activity. And you can go to Israel, you can go any place else. Absolutely. Cyprus has gone to Israel and really came out of our problems much faster than Greece did. But in the end, if we do not really sit together for a day or 10 days or whatever we need to really understand how we can help Greece and the young people, specifically what programs we could encourage and finance if we have to really help entrepreneurship in each and every area of activity, whether it's technology, incubation of new technologies, companies, etc., how we can really take advantage of the market demand for Greek and Mediterranean diet and organic foods, etc., we can sell at a much higher price than anything else, as you know, Dean. And how we can make Greece a hotel. How can make Greece a hotel to take advantage of the things that God gave us and our culture gave us to increase tourism instead of being 17.5% to become 35%, etc. All these things, can talk about anything we want. But if we do not sit around, few of us, to really decide that we are going to attempt to accomplish these three things that will become a multiplier for the Greek economy, and we can do it because that's what we've been doing for our whole lives, basically. We're all successful people, and many of us here. So let's sit together and say, yeah, we are willing to help. We are willing to help in this and this and this way, and finally do it. If we come here every year, or meet in New York or whatever, for 45 minutes or an hour, and say, yeah, we like to help Greece, etc., we are going to help this way, that way, and that way, it will never happen. So I believe that once and for all, we have to have a central forum which our whole goal will be to help Greece and Cyprus in this and this and this way. If we do not do it, we'll be here next year and the year after, and they will say, oh yeah, of course we can go here and there, and we have the brain power, we have the know-how. We've been doing these things for our whole lives. It's nothing that is foreign to us. We need to bring this know-how and expertise here and help them with some money. If we are willing to do that, we will thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. John Calamos, last question for you, and then we'll turn it over to the audience for a few questions. A lot of what we're talking about seems unfortunately aspirational as opposed to actual implementation of the types of reforms and ideas that are being bandied about on this panel. Given that and the overall economy and global status, what is your outlook on the Greek economy for the next, let's say, 18 months or so?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, I thought it seems like they're going down the right path, except slowly. But the strategy, privatization is a good example. Privatization is trying to recreate the private sector, and that's a good strategy. But we have to remember, culture trumps strategy every time. If the people do not believe that privatization is a good thing, then it's not going to happen. When the Heritage Foundation New York measures economic freedoms of all the countries around the world, Greece has one of the lowest ratings for economic freedoms. So when we're talking about somebody starting a business, doing this, and they have no freedom to do so, what do? They go somewhere else. And so the culture has to change to say, we need to rebuild the private sector. The government doesn't run businesses, it's the referee. It's the referee of the business. Make sure it's doing fair. So the culture has to talk about how do we rebuild the private sector from small businesses. Small businesses, as was pointed out, creates jobs. But we have to make it easy for them to do that here. And if we can recreate the private sector here, we'll see the job growth, we'll see that. And instead of, when we talk about the debt and splitting up the debt and cutting the pie, let's talk about how you increase the top line, the revenue stream through the private sector by increasing that. And that's a difficult proposition because it has to come from all the people, that cultural change where I want a business here, I want to grow the business, I want to do those things. That's going to be, hopefully over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, that's what happens.
Thank you. And thanks everybody on the panel. I think, Nicholas, we have a few minutes for questions, is that right?
Yes, we do. I would appreciate, though, if anyone has a question, please ask a question. No statement, no
We're in Greece, not going to happen.
Please.
Thank you for your kind wisdom and knowledge that you shared with us today. My name is Markopoulos Evangelos. I'm a professor and an entrepreneur. I will try to make the question short, but I must also add a couple of comments because you said about the brain power. No, it has to, because the question without the first part is like an equation. X plus Y is equal to Z. You cannot have a good question without having both sides. So, yes, we do have brain power in Greece, tremendous brain power that has to be utilized. And about the statement about Israel, because I have been in Israel many times, I have even taught there, I must say that most of the money from Israel comes from the US. The Jewish companies, they invest very, very much money in the Israeli startups and Israeli companies, something which does not happen here. We don't see, for example, Greek-American, Greek-Australian, Greek-African companies investing on Greek startups. So the question is that, yes, we have this talent, we need to help it out, but we need to have help from abroad. For example, I have a company in America, in San Francisco. Yes. I have a company in San Francisco, and we develop software here with Greek people. So we help the Greek employment. So are you willing to help those Greek entrepreneurs who are seeking opportunities to maintain and to grow their people and their talents here in Greece by working with such companies?
Go ahead, John.
Yes.
I would point out before you answer, there's an entrepreneurial fair tomorrow for that very reason.
Exactly, and everybody here on this panel is on the board of the Hellenic Initiative that is having an entrepreneurial conference tomorrow. But to answer your question, you say all the money coming from all the corporations and everything in the United States. That is absolutely correct. There's a lot of money from all over the world going to Israel. But why? Because they made it easy for money to go there. The government of Israel gave tax abatements and made it very, very accessible for all the major corporations to invest in this tech incubator, okay? If Greece does that, you will see more money than you've ever seen from all parts of the world, including the United States. But they need to get that right. And until they do that, you're never going to get the flood of money. That's a perfect example of how it works. But the reason it works is because the government made it possible by letting the private sector do what they do best, and that's capitalism.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hi, my name is John Salavopoulos. I'm Managing Director of Global Sustain. I'm active in Germany, Greece, and US, and we support the internationalization of Greek companies abroad. Two short questions. You talked about the support and giving incentives to Greek entrepreneurs. I have published many times a proposal about giving incentives to the investors investing in Greek companies, especially tax incentives. Would you agree, or what kind of incentives would you propose? For example, in Germany, they give 20% back to investors investing in startup companies, and 20% they get back, the investors, not the entrepreneurs. Would you see such a kind of proposal helpful, or what kind of other incentives would you propose? Second short question, mostly to John Calamos, but could add everybody else in the panel. I would fully agree and support your comment about the change of culture, and it's the most difficult thing to do. What would you propose in order to achieve and start having some steps in the direction of culture? I would add the comment, do we need a failure culture, in the meaning we shouldn't be afraid of failing and start again from the beginning? Thank you.
You want to take that second question first?
Well, I think the change of culture has to come bottom up. It has to come from the people. They have to be unified over how do we build this, it's a difficult issue, there's no doubt about it. It's a difficult issue. You know, do you have newspapers that talk about it? Do you have magazines that highlight it so that you can begin to build a consensus around building the private sector and competing within this world economy? I wish I had a real simple answer, do this and it'll be all done, but it's a complex problem.
Anyone have a reaction to the first question, if you remember it? Dean, go ahead.
I'm going to get myself in trouble here by answering this. It's a good question, but it's also a question that I think, the answer can be probably very challenging, because sitting here as investors, if one were offered incentives to invest, tax rebates, however it's structured, does it encourage you? Does it help? Of course. But it's also a very challenging political discussion to have in an environment like we're in today, when you talk about populism around the world. To me, I would prefer to see incentives at the employer level, at the company level. I'd rather see reduction in pension payments, simpler, less taxes on the underlying companies. If they're more profitable, that flows up, the multiples are higher, and you make more money on that company versus getting a rebate for investing. Obviously, again, it's a good model if it works, but it's a very difficult thing to discuss in this political environment today.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. Dimitri?
Hi, yeah. My question is very simple. I think between this panel, there is plenty of capital, and there are plenty of good ideas, as well as organizations like the Hellenic Initiative. We're never short of interest, capital, and ideas. What we are short of is what we can do to affect and lobby the governments. The government is the biggest roadblock for anything to happen in Greece. And if we cannot tackle that or properly lobby that, nothing will ever change, because we can have all the goodwill, all the ideas, all the capital. If we get blocked by the institutions and the laws, nothing will ever flow to the end cause. So what do you recommend to do vis-a-vis that element?
Nikos?
Yeah. You're right, it's very difficult to change the government. They are controlled as well by the Troika. So all these heavy taxes, basically, they are imposed to Greece because of the Troika. Given that, and of course we know that this is the deterrent for investment from all over the world. As John said, we could have zillions of dollars being invested in Greece if these prohibitive tax laws and other deterrents disappear. And that's why we need to really understand how to expand the existing business, whether it is an oil mill, a honey manufacturer, etc., etc. These are existing, a winemaker, etc., etc. These are existing business with permits and licenses to make things, and they just need to expand with our help and open and create more partnerships and cooperatives in these areas, so they will expand the marketplace and bring some cash into the economy for it to start operating. The same with tourism. These things can be done with existing facilities, so we will not need these permits from the government. I understand that these successful entrepreneurs eventually need to pay these high taxes, but at least they will be generating income that will help more and more for the economy to really start moving. Hopefully, eventually, the Troika will allow us, or the IMF will forgive some of the debt, so the government will be able, and they should, if they were smart, of course, lower the taxes, but it's nothing that we can do right now with the government. It's not in the cards. So do we sit back and say, oh, I wish this was the case, etc., etc.? We have to find some way to start this economy going, and I believe we can, in a small way.
Thank you.
And everything starts small. That's how it starts.
Thank you. I wanted to thank all of the panelists today. Let's give them a round of applause. That was really insightful and informative.
Constantine, can we please have one more question from Mr. Mario Sofroniou from Kokomat? One more question?
Absolutely.
Nico? One more question. Thank you.
I think my question relates to the previous question, but more directly, I think the private sector is stifled, I would like to emphasize that, by the government. The question was not answered. But I will propose a challenge to you. I think a lot of the entrepreneurs here, because the private sector is vibrant, is merely stifled by the government, why don't you write an open letter to the government? Okay, Nikos, say what you require the government should do in order to instigate and change in the private sector, not in the private sector, I beg your pardon, in the mentality of the government to support the private sector. And it's a very easy solution. Write an open letter to the government.
That's a good idea, just like Socrates did.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Mr. Bornozis.